They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon.
All that gives me more hope that if he does do a deal, it will be a deal that Israel might not love, but Israel can live with.
Well, you know what I say to that, Mark? Oy vey, okay? Israel cannot rely on a deal, even one that President Trump makes.
Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, and as per usual, I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Bloom. Now, we are speaking to you on Wednesday in Israel. Last night was the State of the Union, where President Trump spoke about some of the issues we're going to refer to today. And of course, tomorrow, Thursday, is the day for another round. I think it's the third round of indirect talks between the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran on whether they can get a nuclear deal. And we are speaking to you in the middle of these two events. But let me first ask Ruthie, did you actually wake up and watch? Because in Israel, it was like 4 a.m. Did you wake up and watch the president in the State of the Union address?
I have to admit that I didn't wake up at 4 in the morning. I did wake up at 5:30. I rewound it and watched the whole thing. That I will say. I thought it was an incredible speech. Of course, most of it was devoted to internal U.S. policy, politics, etc. But some of it was devoted to foreign policy. And that's what you and I are going to talk about. So let's say we want to zero in on what's preoccupying, I would say, most of the world, but especially Israelis who have been making a lot of jokes on the one hand and anticipatory anxiety, expressions of anticipatory anxiety on the other about when this is happening and are we going tonight? Are we going to have to run to bomb shelters, etc.? And I can tell you that when I go to sleep every night, I hear Israeli Air Force jets overhead all night long. And this is with U.S. fighter jets in Israel and aircraft carriers in the region and everything. So everybody is sort of on tenterhooks. And as you said, another round of negotiations. So here, let's just hear what President Trump said about the Islamic Republic in his State of the Union address, and it was well into it. Was something like nearly, I don't know, more than an hour into his lengthy speech.
As president, I will make peace wherever I can, but I will never hesitate to confront threats to America wherever we must. The regime and its murderous proxies have spread nothing but terrorism and death and hate. They've killed and maimed thousands of American service members and hundreds of thousands and even millions of people. They've killed at least, it looks like, 32,000 protesters in their own country. They've already developed missiles that can threaten Europe and our bases overseas, and they're working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States of America. They were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons. Yet they continue. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon. I will never allow the world's #1 sponsor of terror, which they are by far, to have a nuclear weapon. Can't let that happen.
So, Mark, that was one of many standing ovations that the president received during that speech. I didn't count them. I'm sure somebody did. Many, many, many. Well deserved, except for one point that you and I have spoken about before, and that is his emphasis on a deal that prevents nuclearization. And I say, I don't care what's in their deal. You can't make a deal with those religious ideologues. And so the question on everyone's mind is President Trump actually gearing up for military action? He keeps saying, I prefer a deal, I prefer a deal. Now, does he mean it? And what do you think about that? Do you prefer a deal over military action?
Well, I'd like to back it up a bit and say something else. Trump is very popular in Israel. Israelis like him. And it's actually interesting because the first time Trump stood as a presidential candidate in 2016, and he stood against Hillary, and they polled Israelis. Israelis don't get to vote in American elections. We're not American citizens. It was 2/3 Hillary, 1/3 Trump in 2016. And so by any American comparison, Israelis were very much a blue state, a democratic state. 2/3 for Hillary made us like, New York or California, right? And the reason for that is people didn't know who Trump was, really, in Israel. And also, Hillary was the senator for New York, and she used to come here a lot, and she was Bill's husband, and people liked Bill in Israel for all sorts of reasons. That totally flipped when Trump ran against Biden in 2020, and again in 2024, where Trump got 2/3 of Israelis. And so we became a red state. 2/3. That made us like Mississippi and Alabama. Yes, we were a very pro-Trumpian country. Once again, we don't get to choose. We're not American citizens. We don't get to vote, but the feeling of the country. So most of the country likes that man we just saw. But the 1/3 that doesn't like him, what do they say? They say you can't trust him. And their fear is they say he will do a bad deal with Iran. In other words, they use the NAFTA comparison. And I'm not an expert on NAFTA, but he came out in his campaign, he was against NAFTA. It was bad for American jobs. It was bad for... And then he signed a new deal with Canada and Mexico with a different name. And the experts, apparently, I'm not an expert on this myself, but many experts said it was more or less the same thing, just with a new name. And he said, this is a great victory. But in substance, there wasn't a huge difference. And Trump's Israeli critics, the 1/3 of the people who don't like him, once again, they live in a very strong red state, but they're the minority. They say he could do the same with the Obama deal, with the JCPOA. He could do, what's the word, send Israel down the river, because he'll just make a deal. It'll be more or less the Obama deal, plus minus, because the Iranians won't agree to anything else, and Israel's interests will be flushed down the toilet. That's their fear. What we heard now, I think, tends to indicate that that's not the direction Trump's going to go in. The fact that he was so unequivocal on the nuclear issue, very, very strong language. The fact that he spent so much time talking about ballistic missiles, which is another Israeli concern, yes. The fact that he talks about this regime being terrorism and its proxies and so forth. He said the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism. All that gives me more hope, and now I'm answering your question, that if he does do a deal, in other words, if the Iranians agree to Trump's red lines, it will be a deal that Israel might not love, but Israel can live with.
Well, you know what I say to that, Mark? Oy vey, okay? I'll tell you why. First of all, it isn't true it is true what you said about most Israelis liking Trump. But what you didn't do is you didn't make a distinction between those who, let's face it, during the height of the war in Gaza, the weird thing that happened in Israel was that the Israeli left also started loving Trump. And why did they do that? Because they were saying only Trump is getting our hostages back. Only Trump is going to solve this.
Only Trump will press Netanyahu.
Right, but that Netanyahu is at fault and he's no good and nothing. They cheered for Trump and Witkoff and Kushner, and they said Netanyahu is a criminal, okay? That was the left. I'm talking about the Israeli left. The Israeli left, other than that, before that, loved Democrats, okay? This is not split in, Israelis. The Israeli media, for the most part, they were just enamored of Obama and even Biden. They really made all kinds of excuses for Biden and said that Netanyahu is creating a rift. That was the Israeli left position. Now, when you talk about the people who say they're worried that he's going to sign a bad deal, that tends to be people on the right in Israel, not on the left. People who are concerned that he shouldn't, emulate Obama. And you said, well, if you believe that he's not headed in that direction, I'm with you. I believe he's not at all headed in Obama's direction. Having said that, again, you said, and in that case, then we can trust that he'll make a good deal.
We can live with it.
We can live with it. No, we can't. We cannot live with any deal forged with the Islamic Republic and the Ayatollahs. And the people of Iran are, that is why there is a growing sentiment in Iran. We know this just from Iranian people, protesters, who managed to get this message out and signs out. They were saying at this point they're preferring for Israel to do a military operation. Now, in the 12-day war in June, Israel began, and the United States joined in and smashed most of the nuclear facilities. But as Trump said in his State of the Union address, he said, we demolished their nuclear facilities, and immediately they started building again. Anyway, so there's where you and I part ways. I don't care what experts in Israel, the right, the left, the center, the experts. There is no such thing as a good deal with the Islamic Republic. It doesn't matter if all of Trump's conditions are met, because they won't stick to it. They won't abide by it. They won't let, we've seen it. We know it. This is an evil regime and has been since 1979, and there is no deal you can make with it. That's one thing. The second thing, and I've said this again, I know I sound like a broken record and all that. But having said that, the question then is, will the U.S. administration, that itself is divided on this question, which side will take, I would say, has greater weight at this moment? Because what we're seeing with all those, the aircraft carriers, the weapons, the planes, it really does seem, that's why Israelis believe that a U.S. attack is imminent. The 2026 JNS International Policy Summit will take place April 15 to 17 at the Waldorf Astoria in Jerusalem. Register today at jns-summit.org and use the coupon code JNSTV. That is JNSTV, one word, to receive 20% off all tickets. I look forward to seeing you in Jerusalem.
So I would argue Israelis are, of course, very attuned to this, because if there is a war, their chances is we'll have missiles on Israeli cities and people have to take precautions and so forth. And maybe our country will be, the airport will be closed down and other things, right? And only emergency services will be working. But I would argue most Israelis, at least the people I talk to, I don't know if that's a fair, they are less worried about a war because they think we can, survive that and win that. They're more worried about the possibility of a bad deal. Okay? A bad
Or
deal.
any deal.
No, but this is where this is where you and me have a different opinion. Right? I would argue there's the desirable and there's the possible. A very famous American, I don't remember who, always said, don't let the good stand in the way of the perfect. If you hold
don't let the perfect
stand in the way of the good. Thank you for correcting me. You're 100% correct. Don't let the perfect stand in the way of the good. If it's possible, and I'm not sure, I'm very skeptical. Yes, I'm very skeptical. If the Iranians can meet Trump's basic red lines on the nuclear issue. But if it's possible to get a deal that does, in fact, end once and for all their nuclear program, which must contain two elements, and we spoke about this in previous programs. Netanyahu spoke about this publicly. One, all the enriched uranium inside Iran is taken out of Iran. And secondly, their ability to enrich more uranium in the future, that capability is similarly eliminated. If you can get those two things in a verifiable way, and sanctions relief only happens after these things actually occur and not as on the basis of some promise. I mean, we can talk about the other issues, the proxies and the missiles. Trump spoke very eloquently about the missiles. But if you can denucleify Iran in a deal, and I said if because it's not clear to me that all the Iranians will agree to those conditions, but if you can get a serious deal with Iran that actually does implement those things, I would say, like Jews say on Seder night, as part of Passover for our non-Jewish listeners and viewers, right? I would say, Dayenu, it's enough.
Nope.
I'm saying it's not perfect, but if you can actually...
No, because, Mark, I want to stress again, because they lie. and they won't abide by any deal. You say it's verifiable. Let me tell you something else. It won't work because China and Russia are already supplying Iran. Whatever they agree to with the United States will be circumvented. All right. This is a global issue here. And they might say, okay, you know what? We won't develop nukes. Okay, never or whatever. And then, China supplies, North Korea supplies them. It is not going to work, but in any case, you can't trust any deal they sign, and it's never verifiable. And what's more, it's not going to work anyway. I agree with you that Israelis are all willing to go into bomb shelters again. That I think most Israelis, and by the way, I think this is true of the right and the left, would prefer to have a serious strike, including if it puts us at risk. And we're hoping the government, we believe this time, unlike on October 7th, that the Israeli government and the military and the security services have got our backs, are paying such close attention to when it is that we need to prepare for this. A lot of Israelis, as I say, are preparing for it sort of mentally. They're saying, well, should I take my trip, to Europe this week? Should I cancel it? Or should I have my shoes next to my bed to run to the bomb shelter? All kinds of stuff like that. Should I buy more groceries? There's all kinds of talk like that did sort of settle down for a while, because when Trump last month said, help is on the way to the Iranian people, Israelis all started buying batteries for their radios and things like that. They thought this is any second now, as did the Iranian people. Unfortunately, many, many, many were slaughtered in the interim and have been. Anyway, my point is, you and I are never going to agree. I think there is no such thing as a good deal.
Well, maybe our discussion or our argument here is only theoretical, because I said openly, I just said it a moment ago, that I'm very skeptical if the Iranians can agree to the sort of things that you are necessary. And so then, unless you have the fear that Trump just wants a deal and, like his critics say, and he's not really interested in the substance, just he wants to have a victory that he can write down and say, I did this as well as making peace in Africa and in Asia and between India and Pakistan and all the things he said in his address, yes? But if you argue that Trump is serious about getting a deal that actually does what it says it's do, because also the JCPOA Obama's deal, yes, they said it was going to prevent Iran from being a nuclear, but it never could do what it claimed to do because it didn't have the correct ingredients. I also will tell you frankly, yes, if there's a deal that does those things, it's very difficult for Israel to say we don't like that, right? If Trump gets a deal that delivers those conditions and you're the prime minister of Israel, you can, we can as columnists and we as people who are talking, and what are we, talking heads, yes? But for the Israeli prime minister, for any Israeli prime minister, to come out and say, we're against this deal with this American president. And I think that's one of the reasons why Netanyahu actually was very on the record and publicly said, I'm skeptical there'll be a deal with Iran. But if there is going to be a deal, it needs to contain these elements.
Okay, right. So you're absolutely right that Netanyahu is in this predicament because whereas he addressed the joint session of Congress in 2015 to warn against the deal, and Obama boycotted that the session, and it's terrible how Netanyahu is causing a rift with Washington. I mean, the left said it in Israel. And anyway, it didn't prevent the deal from being signed. But it's different. And with Biden, when he said to Biden during the Gaza war, listen, if you withhold weapons, we'll fight with our fingernails, etc. But when you have a president like Trump, who is so pro-Israel and so embracing of Israel, and has met with Netanyahu 8 times, 7 of them at the White House, or in the U.S. anyway, which is unprecedented. Of course, Netanyahu is not going to want to go up against him and criticize him. There's no way he wants to do that. Having said that, just as Trump said in his State of the Union address, we have to protect Americans. Netanyahu says, my duty is to protect Israelis and the Jewish people. Now, it's possible that if some ridiculous deal is signed, I don't care what's in it. As I said, it doesn't matter what's in that deal. Even if it meets all of what Netanyahu would like, it will be a false one. So it's Israelis won't be safe. Nobody will, not just Israelis. So what will have to happen is that then Israel, again, what it'll have to do is be on the defensive and wait until we're attacked or there's some kind of terrorist. We're going to be just playing whack-a-mole all over again. And speaking of that, just one more point that's concerning Israelis, that it rightfully, by the way, and that the Israeli military is beefing up security in the north of Israel, because what we know is the Islamic Republic has asked or pressuring Hezbollah in Lebanon to, if there's a U.S. strike, that it should join in with Iran in attacking Israel. The Houthis have said they would also. The thing is, when your enemy says something, take it seriously. And right now, as I said, Israelis are gearing up for something that may or may not happen. But if the United States doesn't do something, don't forget, in June, Israel struck Iran first. Now, that was retaliatory after all these missiles and things from Iran and Hezbollah, etc., and the Houthis. But again, Israel cannot rely on a deal, even one that President Trump makes.
So I would say the following. It's clear to me that, as you said correctly, it's the job of the American president to protect the people of the United States, and it's the job of the Israeli government and the Israeli prime minister to protect the people of Israel. That's the bottom line. And sometimes the interests aren't 100% parallel. Yes, sometimes you can have different emphasis and so forth. And I understand that. All I'm saying is that if Trump really can get a deal that does, in fact, close down, that's something that Israel will have a problem saying no to. But I think what we can always say, and I think Netanyahu has said this in the past, and he'll say it again, is that always Israel reserves the right. America and Tehran, yes, this Islamic regime can sign a deal that Israel always reserves the right to act to protect our own people. This is a bilateral deal between the United States and Iran, the Islamic Republic. Both parties are going to abide by this agreement, we hope, yes, and if not, there are consequences in their relationship. But nonetheless, Israel, we might like parts of the agreement, we might not like the agreement, depending what the agreement is, if there is an agreement, of course, but we reserve the right to act. Nothing will prevent Israel from acting to defend our people. No international deal. But can I also add, you raised a very important issue. I'm not sure all the people who watch Israel Undiplomatic are aware of this, and that's the issue of Lebanon. Because we know that in the 12-day war last summer, June last year, we surprised Iran with our attack. And one of their great frustrations was their most important proxy, Hezbollah in Lebanon, which over the years they've spent literally hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, building up the Hezbollah military machine. And because Hezbollah had been hit a number of times by Israel, because we took out their senior leadership, Nasrallah and others, right, Hezbollah decided to stay out of it. And Iran was furious with Hezbollah. From the Iran's point of view, we put all this effort into building up this asset that was supposed to be there for us, and when push came to shove, Hezbollah was irrelevant. Now, because everyone's talking now about war, and a strike on Iran will not be, it could be a tactical surprise, but it won't be a strategic surprise. The Iranians are putting a lot of pressure on Hezbollah to get involved. And it's not impossible that they will this time. We could also have missiles from Lebanon as well as having missiles from Iran. Now, Hezbollah's capacity to hurt us is greatly reduced since all the Israeli strikes, and we've really deleted their military machine, but it has a residual capability. But if Hezbollah does get involved, I predict good things. I predict that, first of all, Israel will be able to protect our people well, and will be able to agree to hit back very hard against Hezbollah. I think Hezbollah will isolate itself in Lebanon even more by dragging Lebanon into a war with Israel for a foreign country, for Iran, and that will maybe allow, when the war is over, for for more aggressive and energetic steps by the rest of Lebanon against Hezbollah. And finally, I want to throw out a prediction. There were reports about 3-4 weeks ago that Hezbollah and the Syrian government, who you're no fan of, you call him a terrorist in a suit, and in many ways he is a terrorist in a suit. They were talking of them two going to war. And I was thinking of the following. If Hezbollah fires at Israel and Israel fires back and there's an Israel-Hezbollah war in Lebanon, is it not possible that this Syrian government, for its own reasons, has a long list of reasons to want to get back at Hezbollah, that they want their revenge on Hezbollah? Could you find Syrian forces crossing the Syrian-Lebanese border and attacking Hezbollah targets and Hezbollah bases along the Bekaa Valley, which is right on the border with Syria? That way, not only does the Syrians get their revenge, but the Syrian regime also earns brownie points in Washington, which is very important to them.
Well, a lot of what you said, that hypothetical, will depend on Turkey. The neo-Ottoman Erdogan, who is another evil actor, and sadly he's joining the Board of Peace in Gaza, etc. But he has a stronghold in Syria, and also, hopefully, if the Syrian leader would like to kill some Hezbollah terrorists, he might want to stop killing Kurds, Christians, and Druze in Syria. His bloodlust is a little problematic, but that's the Middle East, okay? And that is what Americans, and I don't care how pro-Israel they are, have a trouble grasping. And Trump has trouble grasping it, but certainly Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, when they talk about Middle East policy, but also culture, meetings, it's like they're just living on another planet of who they're dealing with. And, anytime some guy in robes comes up and is nice to them, oh, their son, we had a fruitful meeting. They don't get this jihadist, religious, fanatic, that logic, Western logic, does not work with them. That's one thing they don't get. But I also wanted to say, I forgot to mention this, that today, right after President Trump's State of the Union address, the spokesman for the Foreign Ministry of the Islamic Republic, the spokesman, in other words, Araghchi's spokesman, tweeted this long tweet, how it's all lies, America lies, Israel genocidal, Israel lies, we're like Goebbels, it's propaganda and truth, and if you repeat a lie enough, it'll stick, etc. This long tweet in English, other language, I'm sure in Farsi as well. And this is right after Trump spoke. This is right before Witkoff is headed to meet with this spokesman's boss, to negotiate in good faith, supposedly. Okay, so and all the while the regime figures are calling Trump the yellow pig. They're saying we're going to kill American generals. So I trust that Trump is listening to this, and I hope that all of this is just A, to get their ducks in a row, B, to make sure that enough Americans understand there was no choice left, and that, because there's going to be midterm elections in America, but also the world. And that brings us to one other point. You said that's true. His State of the Union was last night, and tomorrow there's the talks. And today, as we're speaking...
Look, and before you go to that, I want to say something, just to respond to what you said, and then we'll go to where you want to go, because I know where you want to go.
Okay.
I want to say the following. You're concerned that no one knows the Middle East. People in the West and in America have illusions about the Middle East. And I would just refer to you two things. Number one, the Secretary of State, who the President in the State of the Union, right, praised as the best Secretary of State we've ever had, talked about this when he was in Munich at the Security Conference, right? He talked about an Islamic regime, an extremist regime, a regime that,
He knows.
and so he understands that. And Trump also talked about Iran being the world's number one state sponsor of terrorism, right?
Right.
I don't think Now, when you say do Witkoff and
Kushner.
Kushner, do they understand that? I think part of the way this game is being played, this very serious game, is that there are good cops and bad cops. But ultimately, Trump is the one who's right. And so maybe he wants Witkoff to smile at the Iranians and to negotiate with them. They're doing what they're doing at the behest of the president. And at the same time, the military is moving all their assets to the region at the behest of the president. And at the same time, he's saying, you're the state. In other words, I don't get, it's not personal. It's not about Witkoff and Kushner having illusions. Their job is to be the good cops and to negotiate. And at the same time, I'm preparing my very big stick, ultimately to give all the options to the president. But now to what you said. We say in Israel, and it's true, that we have no better friend in the world than the United States of America. No better friend in the world, right? Where would we be without American support? What would happen at the UN Security Council without the United Nations? What would we do without American military support? Yeah, 100% true. We've never asked American boys to fight and die for us. We've always said, give us the equipment and the backing so we can protect ourselves, and it's the basis of a very good relationship.
Or sell us the
Yeah.
equipment, excuse me.
Correct. So sell us equipment that also, yeah, we'll pay for it.
Exactly.
And of course, we argue, and I think we're right, that America has no better friend than Israel because we're a very good ally of them. So it's a two-way street. But that doesn't mean, and now I'm getting to the point you wanted to raise, that does not mean that Israel has no other friends in the world. And we were talking when we were planning to what we wanted to say today in the program. We were saying, will we have traffic problems today in Jerusalem? Because another important friend of Israel is visiting us today, and that's the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi. And now let's be clear here. India, first of all, is the largest democracy on the planet, population point of view. It's a very important player in Asia. India, for many years, had a special status in the non-aligned movement. It carries, it punches above its weight. India is a very serious country. And guess what? India is a friend of Israel, as we're seeing now in this trip by Modi to Jerusalem. Today, he's landing as we speak. He'll be speaking at the Knesset later today, apparently. He's got a whole program of meeting with the Prime Minister. Tomorrow, he's at Yad Vashem. And this Indian-Israeli relationship, which covers many areas, it's diplomatic cooperation, it's economic cooperation, it's military cooperation, it's technological cooperation. But I want to just our viewers and listeners to understand. For many years, Israel had a terrible, terrible relationship with India. We didn't even have an embassy in Israel until the early 1990s. Sorry, in India. We're in New Delhi. We didn't even have an embassy. We were stuck with this Mickey Mouse consulate in Mumbai, what was then called Bombay, right? We've seen a relationship that was once terrible transformed over the last few years, the last decade or so, to a very strong and mutually advantageous partnership. And all those people who say Israel is isolated, yes, and it's true, we've got problems with Europe. We can't ignore the problems we have with Europe, and we can't ignore the problems we have with many countries. But to say that Israel doesn't have friends, and we have powerful friends, and India is an Asian power, America is a global power, and we can be grateful, but we can also feel strength from our alliances with these important countries.
Oh, absolutely. And Modi is also a good friend of Netanyahu's. They happen to have chemistry between them. We know that from previous visit. But what's really important here, you're right, there's cooperation in various fields, and there are Indian Jews, Jews of Indian origin who live in Israel. And also, Israelis always make these treks to India after the army. Israelis, many young Israelis are familiar with India. So there is that. There's tourism. There are a lot of cooperative efforts. But here, what is crucial today is that this is part of the anti-Sunni Shiite Islamist axis. And Modi is on the same page as Netanyahu where that is concerned. That's number one. And number two, it's no accident, or it seems to be no accident, that he's arriving just as there is, I would say, a countdown, or a sense of a countdown to what appears to be an imminent military action by the U.S. or by Israel or jointly some kind of military action. And it's no accident that he arrived. And apparently there's also going to be serious military cooperation, signed some kind of memorandum of understanding that involves actual military technology between Israel and India during this visit. And that's not the timing is not accidental. Also, he might want to come here quickly before the airspace shuts down because of Iranian missiles. That also could be.
Can I just say, I think it's a little more nuanced than the way you said it, if you don't mind me correcting you instead of you just correcting me the whole time for mispronouncing and part. I think the Iranian
Go for it.
position on questions like Iran and the Palestinians, they don't echo Israeli positions on all issues.
No.
On the contrary, they can have a different perspective. But what they do have is a strong friendship with us and a desire that cooperation with us can be to our mutual advantage. And there's no doubt, I've seen it up close, yes, the personal relationship between Netanyahu and Modi. In many ways, they are similar people in the way that they look at the world and the way they've achieved power in their countries and the way they both continue to win election after election, yes? Although we'll see what happens this year in Israel. We don't want to, we don't know yet. But there's a friendship there, and it's good to end on a good note. That all those people who say Israel is increasingly isolated in the world, just look at this visit today in Jerusalem by the Prime Minister of the largest democracy on the planet. And with those words, I say farewell to you and farewell to all our viewers and listeners until we meet again next week.
Looking forward to it, Mark.